So, communication is the key to a happy marriage, right? That's what everybody told me. So, naturally, when my husband and I were struggling, I did what I thought any good wife would do. I talked about it a lot. I wanted us to be closer. I wanted him to understand me. And I wanted us to be able to work through our problems. But the more that we talked, the more disconnected it felt like we became. And eventually, I really had to ask myself, this uncomfortable question. Was my communication actually creating more connection or was it creating more distance? Because what I discovered completely changed the way that I approach my marriage, conflict, and intimacy. Welcome to the Softening into Love podcast. I'm Laura Amador, relationship coach for wives, and I'm so excited that you're here. So, today I want to talk about the difference between communication that creates real emotional safety and communication that quietly pushes your husband away. So, many years ago, when I was first married, I did believe that, everybody says communication is the key to a happy marriage. And yeah, and I figured the problem with that belief isn't necessarily that it's not true. The problem was that I believed, okay, if some communication is good, then more must be better. In other words, I have free reign to communicate every thought that pops into my brain when it comes to my marriage and my husband. Another way of saying that is that manners kind of went out the door, and I figured, in the name of honesty, I'm just going to say what needs to be said. And I wasn't really thinking about how that might impact him or how it might be and feel on the receiving end of that. And so, for example, I remember very distinctly one night my husband and I had been on a date, and we went to see a movie. And I forget what the movie's called exactly, but it was about this woman who married a time traveler, and I think it's literally called The Time Traveler's Wife, something like that. But it had me in tears. And on the drive home, I really wanted to talk about the movie. I wanted to talk about our feelings and our interpretations of love and marriage and relationships. And, I just wanted to dive in and have this juicy conversation. And I remember feeling frustrated that I wasn't getting a whole lot from him in terms of like the depth of conversation that I was craving. And I remember just turning that into making it mean something personal about me or about us. And literally, by the end of this drive, we'd just come home from this beautiful date. By the end of this drive, I was upset. I was saying really, blamey, nasty things that weren't even true, like, "Oh, you don't know how to, hold a conversation. You never communicate. We can't just talk." I had turned it into this whole thing, which is so embarrassing to even share this with you at this point. But it's true. I had turned it into this whole thing, and I was feeling hurt. And I'm sure he was feeling confused about how we ended up here. And I don't even know how to explain to you how we had ended up in this place. I couldn't just have enjoyed that we had just had this beautiful date and seen this great movie. And things like this, I would end up in these arguments kind of masked in my attempt to communicate because I just wanted to talk about our feelings. I wanted to talk about our relationship, and I would run up against these walls all the time where it just didn't go how I had imagined or envisioned. Also, whenever I felt like there was a distance or a disconnect or a disagreement or an issue, I wanted to talk about it. Literally, on our honeymoon, one of the first things that happened was that I realized one of us had kind of dropped the ball on a bill that needed to be paid. It hadn't really, we were brand new married, so it hadn't really been clear who was supposed to take care of it. Um, but I was just frustrated that we hadn't talked about it. Of course, it was just as much on me to have clarified or brought that up. But I didn't have the ability to see that at the time. Again, this is so embarrassing to admit to you, but here we are. It's the truth. And so during our honeymoon, I figured, okay, we need to talk about this right now. We need to kind of clarify um, whose responsibility is, what belongs to each one, and sit down and really clarify this. And I remember it just kind of felt like pouring a bucket of cold water over this like beautiful flame that was supposed to be our honeymoon. It just kind of put a damper on things. Not to say that this conversation shouldn't have been had, or wasn't important to kind of get things straight, but I just always felt this urgency to say my feelings, this urgency to feel understood, to have clarity, to have everything figured out, to know the plan, to know what to expect, right? All of these things gave me a sense of safety. In other words, control, right? Control. I didn't want control just for the sake of wanting to be controlling. I wanted to control because it helped me feel safe. And knowing the plans, knowing what to expect, knowing what he was thinking, knowing how he was feeling, all of these things gave me that illusion of safety. Unfortunately, and what I had no idea was going on from his side, which I didn't learn until unfortunately much later, was that it's an unpleasant place to be when the person that you're with is constantly trying to get into your head and, under just, yeah, kind of trying to manage or control you all the time or get answers from you all the time. Um, it can feel very unsettling and uncomfortable. And it wasn't, unfortunately, until later that I understood really that this was actually quite disrespectful as well. It was disrespectful to his experience, right? Not to mention that it must have been quite unpleasant to be with somebody who let fear kind of run their lives, which is unfortunately what I had been doing. I was always so afraid and never exactly quite sure of what. But I was so afraid, if we don't figure out right now who's paying what bills, we're going to be late. And it was, just catastrophizing. If I don't know how he felt about that movie and he doesn't know how I felt about it, do we really understand each other, or is our relationship doomed? Right? It's just, everything felt personal, everything felt urgent. And of course, saying it out loud, it sounds quite silly, right? To hear, I'm sure, how I catastrophize everything. But it wasn't intentional. I don't think I even realized I was doing it. All I knew, and I didn't even know I was afraid. That's the thing. I didn't even know I was afraid. All I knew was that I wanted to know as much as possible, and I didn't even realize why. But I realize now, looking back, it was because I was seeking feeling safe. I was seeking safety, right? I was seeking emotional safety. I was seeking the mental calm that came with the illusion of knowing what to expect, of knowing everything that was on his mind and in his heart, right? Um, in other words, control, or the illusion of it, gave me a sense of safety. And so I clung to that and I sought it out, and I reached for it at every opportunity. Now, from his side, I now understand that, yeah, that was quite unpleasant to be with, right? And I can see that even for myself, and maybe you can too. If you've ever had somebody in your life that has always needed to know, what is your next move? What's your next step? Why did you do something that way? Right? It almost feels like they're just not giving you the benefit of the doubt. It feels like they don't trust you. And I know for me, when I have felt like somebody that I care about doesn't trust me, it's painful because it's kind of insulting to like the person that I am or hope to be and try to be, right? If it's painful to kind of see yourself through that person's eyes when they're not trusting you, it's not a very nice perspective, right? To see myself, it's or to feel like, oh, they don't see me as capable. That's painful. Whether I know for me that that's definitely happened in my life, and it was a painful experience. So if you can imagine for yourself, whether it's been a parent or a boss or a colleague or um, a friend, right? Anyone in your life, or it could definitely possibly be your spouse too, right? It's a painful experience, and I didn't even realize that I was doing that to my husband. And it wasn't that I meant to be mistrustful or to not trust him, right? Or to not give him the benefit of the doubt. It was just me seeking that sense of safety. The more that I know, the more that I knew, the more safe that I felt. Um, without it, yeah, without even realizing that I was paying a price that was costing me connection, because every time that I have to know what he's thinking or what he's feeling or what's his next move or why he did something, I'm paying the price of connection and intimacy, because it's really hard to be connected and intimate with somebody who you feel doesn't see you as capable or doesn't trust you, right? And so once I learned that, thank goodness that I did. But once I learned that, I went the other way. It was kind of like I was on the pendulum of, kind of control or seeking that safety. I was far away on one side of it, on the controlling side, and I swung drastically to the other side of the pendulum, where I became so afraid to be disrespectful. I felt so afraid to be on his paper that I felt very, it was almost like I was afraid of communication from there on. I was afraid of sharing my thoughts, my opinions, my preferences, my needs, because I thought that by doing so, I would be treading too close to his paper. And so I lived from the position of, I kind of operated from this place of just, I'm going to receive, 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 and just not say anything, not have expectations, not demand, not ask for, not share my opinions because I don't want to be contrary. Right? I don't want to um, contradict and be disrespectful. I was so afraid of being disrespectful because I valued our connection so much that I now was unintentionally minimizing myself and sort of disappearing. And unfortunately, I did that for a long time. I kind of just, yeah, I really minimized myself. If he, voiced an opinion, I would not share mine because I didn't want to be contrary. If I had a preference about something, again, I didn't want to be contrary, so I just wouldn't say it. If something felt like it was too much for me, let's say that he asked me for a favor, you know, um, if he asked me to stop at the grocery store, but I already had a million other errands to run and a crying baby in the back seat, I wanted to receive and be respectful. So I would just say, okay, without even checking in with myself first. Uh, it was just, I could go on and on with the examples of how I just kind of I was so afraid of being disrespectful that I wasn't honoring myself. Now, of course, that didn't feel very good for me, right? So I went from being so focused on creating emotional safety for myself that I forgot about respecting him. And then I swung the other way and became so, um, I prioritized his emotional safety so much that I forgot to check in with myself and to honor myself. And eventually, I realized, okay, I think this isn't exactly how it's supposed to be. I think there's supposed to be. I think there has to be a balance here, right? Like most things, there's nuance, and again, I have been somebody who has looked for safety so much that I loved the safety of kind of black and white, like this is right, this is wrong, right? And seeing nuance in situations kind of took me out of that sense of safety because it was like, oh no, now there isn't always this clear cut right or wrong, or is there? I don't know. This is confusing, right? This is scary. I didn't want to risk connection, but I also knew that I couldn't go on for the rest of my life just making myself small. That didn't feel good. And so that was the question that I sat with for a while. Can I be respectful and authentic at the same time? Can I be respectful and real and myself, like fully myself? Because I felt like being respectful had kind of led me to shutting down parts of myself. And I didn't feel authentic anymore. I felt I didn't feel like I could fully be myself. But the more that I thought about it, the more that I realized, wait a second, one thing does not need to cross out the other. I think I can have both. I can be both respectful and fully myself together. And I don't know, maybe you're listening to this and thinking, yeah, Laura, duh, of course. But my goodness, it took me years to figure this out for myself. And so I'm sharing in case you're anything like me and have struggled with this desire to be fully yourself, to be authentic, to be real, to be fully you and loved as you and seen as you and accepted as you, and to still be able to honor the connection and be respectful, right, of his experience as well. And um, yeah, not zap the relationship of oxygen, right? To really accept. I think it comes down to this word acceptance, right? To fully accept and love him, and fully accept and love yourself. And it was a journey for me to get there. And so I'd love to share a little bit of that journey with you today. So one of the biggest ways that I had a breakthrough in this was during my pregnancies. It was quite a vulnerable time for me, right? Because I couldn't do a whole lot of what I could normally do. I was on bed rest for a time, and during one of them, I was just in that mode of I'm just going to receive. I was in that mode of making myself small because I was so afraid, right? And so I just wanted to be respectful so much. And what's interesting is I was operating from fear when I was being controlling, and I was still operating from fear when I was being so focused on being so perfectly respectful, right? It was still fear, just in a different way. I think that's the problem. That undercurrent of fear had just followed me, and it was just presenting in a new way. So I would just kind of, yeah, never voice what I wanted or what I needed or, my desires. I did not honor my limits. So I just still tried to do everything that I would have normally done. And it was a really difficult time for me because I would look around at the messy house and feel resentful. I would feel, there were times I was literally hungry, but I would just tell myself, oh, I'll get a granola bar. I couldn't just voice what I wanted. Again, I was just so afraid of, oh, he's going to feel like I'm telling him to do something. And is that worth it to lose connection? I had it so wrong. I had it so wrong. And so the next time around that I was in a similar situation, uh, I realized, okay, you know what? I was so focused on respect that I forgot that I also get to be vulnerable. I also, and that's vulnerability is where I get to be real. That's where I get to be authentic. And that's how I get to be both. Right. And so the next time I just was very expressive about my desires. I would love a glass of water. I would love a hearty meal. I would love a foot massage. Uh, I would love company. I would love to watch a comforting movie. And my limits, I can't keep up with the house. I can't bring the laundry up. I literally couldn't, right? I can't, um, I can't, right? Just anything that I encountered that was going to send me into feeling resentful or that was going to be too much for me, or that I was just too tired for, it was, I can't. Without fear, really shutting that fear that if I say I can't, I'm not going to look capable or I'm going to feel like a failure or I'm going to look selfish, right? It was this process of shedding fear of what I thought about myself, shedding fear of what anyone else thought about myself, including my husband, sometimes most especially him. It was just shedding fear. That is what helped me to come into honoring myself and feeling like I could be myself and be loved as myself and to really be authentic. Another example is I remember um, we've always hosted people. My husband is very social. I've become much more social for sure than I used to be. Um, and so there was so back in the day, right, when I was just I needed to know all the plans and what time are they coming, what time are they leaving. Um, and I remember there was, there were times where we'd have people over and then I'd feel kind of resentful because I'd feel left out, or I'd feel um, I don't know, like I suppose my personality is a little bit. I love to have great conversations with people, right? I love that, like kind of one on one or like small group. But I tended to get a little bit overwhelmed in bigger groups, and so I would just kind of listen, but not have a whole lot to contribute. And that would, yeah, then I would feel kind of left out and sad or uh, resentful even back then. And so, my husband would be like, "What's wrong?" And I couldn't even express myself. So I would just blame him for how I was feeling, right? I'd be like, "Well, you didn't talk to me the whole night or you didn't check in with me." And he's like, "Well, we were in a group. We were all talking together." Um, and I would just be resentful, right? And blamey. Um, and that never led to connection for sure, right? But then, afterwards, when I was so focused on just be respectful, the same situation would happen. I might feel kind of my energy would kind of shut down because I had felt a little left out or something. And he'd come to me and say, "What's wrong? What's wrong? What's going on?" And I'd say, "Oh, nothing." And put on this smile and say, "Nothing's wrong. Everything's good." And that did protect the connection in that, in a sense, because I wasn't blaming him, I wasn't being disrespectful. So it definitely did serve me for a time. But then it came to a point where I felt like I wasn't really being seen or understood because I wasn't allowing myself to be seen or understood, just kind of pretending like, yeah, I'm good. Um, but not feeling good on the inside. It was a lonely experience. And so I realized after a time that that wasn't it either. And then when I realized, oh, actually I can be respectful and be vulnerable at the same time. How? What is the distinction here? By sharing from my paper instead of getting all over his, from sharing from my experience. Not about him though, right? Because then it's a slippery slope right into blaming him and making him responsible for how I feel. Really taking ownership and responsibility over how I feel. And once I've taken that responsibility, I can share that, right? So that, that meant that once I realized that, if my energy got a little bit low and he said, "Oh, what's wrong?" I could say, "Oh, you know, I just miss you a little bit tonight. I was just missing you." That was true vulnerability because now I wasn't blaming him for how I was feeling. I was taking real responsibility and ownership that it wasn't anybody's fault. And in fact, it's not even a bad thing, right? It's not wrong or something's wrong with my personality or anything like that, because that was a whole other can of worms that was often present as well. Um, that, I could say, oh, I enjoy listening. I'm a great listener and I don't need to beat myself up because I don't have something to contribute all the time, right? That's okay. That's okay. And just giving myself that grace and realizing, okay, what's really going on here? Oh, I think I just missed him a little bit, right? And saying that, boom, instant connection. I was like, wow, it took me years to figure this out. Before I knew it, his arms were around me and he was like, oh, that's so sweet. I missed you too. Let's go lay down and cuddle on the couch or whatever. And catch up and talk about how the evening went. And I realized, wow, I've been seeking connection all along in all these different ways. For at first by trying to talk, 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 talk. And unfortunately realizing that that didn't lead to the connection that I was craving and wanted. Unfortunately, because my talking often was very unaware and disrespectful. And then I tried to seek connection by basically not talking, right? By being respectful, but also just being afraid of communication altogether because I couldn't trust myself. I couldn't trust myself to maintain respect and be authentic at the same time. And so, boy, it was a journey to get there where I could both trust myself to be respectful and vulnerable, right? To be respectful and authentic, to trust that I could be loved and accepted just as I am, and accept and love him just as he is as well, without needing to know at every second, right? What are his plans? What is he thinking? What is in his heart, right? Just really, um, yeah, it was a trust in myself and a trust in our relationship. But mostly, our marriage became this, it was no longer a place where we sacrificed or where I sacrificed authenticity for politeness. Because I think that was the trap that I fell into for a really long time. It's now a place where emotional safety and intimacy are built on loving integrity, are built on, yeah, I can really be myself and I can be respectful together. And it takes a little bit, it took me at first, especially a little bit of introspection to really be able to have that awareness of, okay, if I'm going to take full responsibility for how I feel, what's really going on under there for me? And most often it was either I wasn't honoring my limits by saying I can't, I wasn't honoring my desires, or, I'm going to kind of pocket this in there as well. I wasn't taking great care of myself, like amazing care of myself, which is really important too. Um, or I just wasn't being vulnerable. And vulnerable, this was my mistake, does not mean vulnerable about him, because that's a slippery slope into being critical and disrespectful and controlling. I wasn't being vulnerable about the relationship, which was the first mistake I made, where I thought, communication, man, let's dissect our relationship and all the problems in it. Because no, then the more that I focus on it, the more that increases, right? But vulnerable is just what is my experience while I'm taking full responsibility of my inner world, right? So these days, I do not withhold my my desires, my limits, my vulnerability, but I do make sure of two things before I even attempt to communicate. These two things are so important. If I go in and try to have a conversation, right? If I try to communicate before I've done these two things, again, it's that a slippery slope into my old ways where I'm either being disrespectful or either disrespecting him or disrespecting myself, right? So the first thing is to make sure that my self care cup is full. So I do not even attempt to communicate if I'm feeling tired or frustrated. You know, that old saying that sometimes people say, never go to bed angry, right? I do the exact opposite. If I'm tired, I go to bed. If I'm angry and tired, for sure I'm going to bed and I'm sleeping in if possible, right? So I make sure that I'm well nourished, well rested, well socialized, well grounded before considering having a conversation. And this is because I can only access my wisest self and show up the way that I really want to and show up in a way that actually is going to create the connection that I want when I have done those things, when I am grounded and rested. The second thing is that I make sure that I have taken that full ownership for my own inner world, my own inner experience, right? And I make sure that any vulnerability is clean and clear of accusations, blame, criticism, or control. I can always share 100% from my paper. In fact, that's what I want to do. That creates deeper intimacy, right? It used to take me at the beginning a little bit more inner exploration to be able to get there because I was so used to blaming others for how I felt. But now I know that I'm really capable of and responsible for articulating myself authentically and respectfully. And this by far has created so much more intimacy than I could have imagined. And yeah, that's what I would invite you to take a look at as well. If you are in, if you can relate to excuse me, if you can relate to either of those things, right? Maybe you're in the first camp where I was of just trying to communicate and want to talk about how you feel and how he feels, um, and maybe just not realizing that or feeling confused as to why you're not feeling more connected after having these conversations. Or maybe you're in the second camp, like I was when my pendulum swung way the other way, where you feel like you're not honoring yourself, or you're not fully being your full self, or you're not feeling authentic in your relationship, right? And I just want to say that you are, you deserve, you're worthy of being able to express yourself and feel fully authentic in your relationship and do so respectfully as well. All right, so I hope that this was helpful. If you want to get started creating more connection in your marriage and you're new to this, I do have a free guide called Three Steps to Reignite Connection. And if you are ready to go beyond tips and really get right into truly transforming your marriage, you can join the Connection Reset for a full step by step process where you can get coaching and guidance and structure and support as you go. You can find both the guide and the link to learn more about the 6-week marriage reset through links in the description. Thank you so much for tuning in. And until next time, keep softening into love.